Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are back with more ideas and opinions of Albert Einstein. Today we are going to read four pieces by Einstein. None of them very long, so bear with me here. First piece we're going to read is called Germany and France. And this was originally published in Mein Weltbild, Amsterdam, Corrido Verlag, 1934. Mutual trust and cooperation between Germany and France can only come about if the French demand for security against military attack is satisfied. But should France frame demands in accordance with this, such a step would certainly be taken very ill in Germany. A procedure like the following seems, however, to be possible. Let the German government, of its own free will, propose to the French that they should jointly make representation to the League of Nations, that it should suggest to all member states to bind themselves to the following: 1. To submit to every decision of the International Court of Arbitration. 2. To proceed with all its economic and military force in concert with the other members of the League against any state which breaks the peace or resists an international decision made in the interests of world peace. So yeah, a lot of confrontation and against between Germany and France. This is between World War One and World War Two. About the time that Hitler's just brought Germany, started to gain control in Germany and is slowly building power. France, on the other hand, is very much struggling. And that's why they would have demands for security against a military attack. So, yeah. And again, Einstein trying to do what he can to keep peace, suggesting things that can keep peace. The next piece we're going to read is called Culture and Prosperity. It was published in Mein Weltbild, Amsterdam, Corrido Verlag, 1934. If one would estimate the damage done to the great political catastrophe to the development of human civilization, one must remember that culture in its higher forms is a delicate plant which depends on a complicated set of conditions and is wont to flourish only in a few places at given time. For it is to blossom, there is needed first of all a certain degree of prosperity which enables a fraction of the population to work at things not directly necessary to the maintenance of life. Second, a moral tradition of respect for cultural values and achievements, in virtue of which this class is provided with the means of living by the other classes, those who provide the immediate necessities of life. During the past century, Germany has been one of the countries in which both conditions were fulfilled. The prosperity was taken as a whole, modest but sufficient. The tradition of respect for culture, vigorous. On this basis, the German nation has brought forth fruits of culture which form an integral part of the development of the modern world. The tradition in the main still stands, though the prosperity is gone. The industries of the country have been cut almost completely from the sources of raw materials in on which the existence of the industrial part of the population was based. The surplus necessary to support the intellectual worker has suddenly ceased to exist. With it, the tradition which depends on it will inevitably collapse also, and a fruitful nursery of culture turn to wilderness. The human race, insofar as it sets a value on culture, has an interest in preventing such impoverishment. It will give what it help it can in the immediate crisis and reawaking that higher community of feeling now thrust into the background by national egotism, for which human values have a validity independent of politics and frontiers. It will procure for every nation conditions of work under which it can exist and which it can bring forth fruits of culture. So here, Einstein's really pushing for the idea that a great nation, a great life can't exist without some kind of culture within it and a respect for other cultures. Next piece I want to read is Minorities, published in Mein Weltbild, Amsterdam, Corrido Verlag, 1934. It seems to be a universal fact that minorities, especially when the individuals composing them can be recognized by physical characteristics, are treated by the majorities among whom they live as an inferior order of beings. The tragedy of such a fate lies not merely in the unfair treatment in which these minorities are automatically subjected in social and economic matters, but also in the fact that under the suggestive influence of the majority, most of the victims themselves succumb to the same prejudice and regard their kind as inferior beings. This second and greater part of the evil can be overcome by closer association and by deliberate education of the minority, whose spiritual liberation can thus be accomplished. The resolute efforts of the American Negroes in this direction have deserve approval and assistance. So very reminiscent of a lot of the stuff I've read in uh, the Dr. King papers and speeches I've been reading, which you can catch on this channel as well. It's under A Testament of Hope. Last piece I'm going to read today is called The Heirs of the Ages, published in Mein Weltbild, Amsterdam, Corrido Verlag, 1934. Previous generations were able to look upon intellectual and cultural progress as simply the inherited fruits of their forebears' labors, which made life easier and more beautiful for them. But the calamities of our time show us that this was a fatal illusion. We see now that the greatest efforts are needed in this legacy of humanity's to prove a blessing and not a curse. For whereas formerly it was enough for a man to have freed himself to some extent from personal egotism to make him a valuable member of society, today he must be also be required to overcome national and class egotism. Only if he reaches those heights can he contribute toward improving the lot of humanity. As regards this most important need of the age, the inhabitants of the small state are better placed than those of the great power, since the latter are exposed, both in politics and economics, to the temptation to gain their ends by brute force. The agreement between Holland and Belgium, which is the only bright spot in European events during the last few years, encourages me to hope that the small nations will play a leading part in the attempt to liberate the world from the degrading yoke of militarism through the renunciation of the individual country's unlimited right of self determination. So, yeah, but essentially, again, pushing for the ideas that it's not just the piece we inherit from our forebears. It's not just the culture we inherit from our forebears. We have to work to improve it. We cannot rest on our laurels because this is what we receive. At least that's how I understand it. But yeah, that'll be all for today. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.